Hello and welcome to the Metal Pack Pod, the industry's leading podcast for the global metal packaging market. The Metal Pack Pod is brought to you by the Metal Packager, the number one digital resource for the global metal packaging market. With over 7,000 monthly users in over 150 countries globally, be sure to check us out on metalpackager.com. I'm your host Alex Fordham, and in today's episode we welcome Charles Johnson, President and CEO of the Aluminium Association. During this episode, we discuss the Aluminium Association's new report detailing the pathway to reducing emissions and how we as an industry can decarbonise the aluminium business by 2050. We discuss how the metal packaging industry needs to play its part for the ultimate mutual benefit of a cleaner and more sustainable planet for our future. The Aluminium Association represents the full value chain of production and jobs in the US, including companies that make 70% of the aluminium and aluminium products shipped in North America. The association is the industry's leading voice, developing global standards, business intelligence, sustainability research, and industry expertise for member companies, policymakers, and the general public. But before we begin the episode, we must give special mention to our sponsors, PPG. Their range of innovative and sustainable solutions help protect and beautify the world. Now on to today's show. So hi Charles, thanks very much for joining me. Looking forward to an interesting discussion about the latest developments at the Aluminium Association. So thanks very much for joining me.
Thanks very much, Alex. I'm really happy to join you. I'm really excited to talk about some of these developments.
Excellent stuff. So just for perhaps our users that aren't as well acquainted with the Aluminium Association, or the Aluminium Association, as I should say. If you can just perhaps give a general overview of the organisation, and then we can get into the nitty gritty of the exciting release and the pathway to decarbonisation, which I'm sure that the industry can certainly get behind. So that's a nice place to start. If we can just have perhaps some context on the organisation in general.
Absolutely, Alex. And speaking for my people, I will stick with aluminum, even though we are very capable of code switching internationally. But since I'm speaking for North America today, aluminum it is. I am president and CEO of the Aluminum Association based in Washington, D.C. We are the 90-year-old trade association representing a little over 70% of the producers who sell into the U.S. market. We have for more than 15 years been the organization that has produced and stewarded the carbon footprint information for the industry and for our major markets in North America. So in that role, we have carried out a broad body of research, both on the embodied carbon of the aluminum we produce and use, as well as the life cycle impact of automobiles and beverage cans and aluminum in the built environment. So we've recently finished a major project, which I'm sure we're going to talk about today. And so I was happy to join you to talk about it. By the way, Alex, I've been in the aluminum industry since the late 1990s. I'm a government affairs practitioner. But most importantly, and one of the reasons I'm so proud of the work that we're doing in this space is that I, for many years, held the sustainability and carbon portfolio for the Western Hemisphere. And so much of the work we're talking about today is work that was originated under my watch, and it's always been near and dear to my heart.
Excellent stuff. So you took the words right out of my mouth there. It sounds like it's very much a labour of love as much as anything for you. And it sounds certainly it's throughout the industry value chain, particularly important topics. So if you can just introduce the report and the pathway to decarbonisation by 2050, that'd be much appreciated.
Sure, and I'm going to give you a little historical context too for that. So last week, the Aluminum Association formally released a North American decarbonization roadmap, which is a science-based target initiative project to scout out a pathway for the North American industry to go from where we are today to where the International Energy Agency believes the world needs to be by 2050, and it's a daunting task. Now, before I get to our report, I will say, it stands on the shoulders of work that's been done before. So several years ago, the International Aluminium Institute, based in London, released a global decarbonization roadmap for the global industry. Very important piece of work, a piece of work that we stand behind in North America, and it's also been built upon by the European Aluminium Association. But when we took a look at it in North America and we started trying to fit ourselves within that global narrative, what we found is that the global report was speaking to trends in the industry that weren't perfectly aligned with where the North American industry is. And there's a reason for that. The North American industry has been an early mover on a lot of the issues and a lot of the actions that must be taken to decarbonize the aluminum industry. And therefore, our starting point is in a different place. And so we realized we needed a North American specific roadmap that could speak to our policymakers and our stakeholders about the work that has to be done in North America. And so, what does that look like? Well, the global report finds that by far the largest contributor to carbon in the global industry is the electricity used in smelting primary aluminum. Absolutely true. However, in North America, the vast majority of the primary aluminum that we use, first of all, is sourced from Canada, which is already hydropowered, and is second sourced from many other low carbon primary sources. And so, for instance, to go to Canada and talk about decarbonizing your electricity inputs, it's nonsensical. Because they're already using hydropower 100% for their smelting. So that's just one example of the way that the global report doesn't speak to policymakers in North America, where, for instance, in Canada, we need to focus on process efficiencies like inert anode technologies and other technologies. And that's where attention and funding should be funneled. The same is true in the United States. While we certainly should be focusing on the primary sector, and this, Alex, is getting where we're going today. In the US, the majority of aluminum that is used each year, around 80%, is secondary aluminum, recycled aluminum, because we have a very mature scrap inventory in North America. And so we have to look at, the report shows us the natural gas firing of those remelt furnaces. And so natural gas energy policy is as or more important than electricity policy in the United States. And so the report that we released has some major findings for North America to steer us in the right direction and to tell us what scrap and how remelt can supercharge our efforts. And it also, along the way, tells us where we are in relation to the rest of the world. And so aluminum production in North America is 50% less carbon intensive than the rest of the world, and it's 2.5 less carbon intensive than aluminum made in mainland China. And so those are important policy points as we look at where decarbonization efforts should be focused, to make sure that we're, first of all, not penalizing early actors and actors who are aggressive in that space, and then second of all, supporting them, because this is a society-wide effort. So that's where we are today, and I'm happy to talk about some of the issues that are specific to recycling and remelt.
We interrupt this episode for a brief segment from our sponsors, PPG.
Packaging coatings from PPG draw on our company's 140-year history of innovation. We never stop improving our solutions to meet the evolving needs of can makers and the marketplace. That spirit of innovation results in technology like the cradle-to-cradle platinum-rated PPG Innovel Pro. PPG Innovel Pro is the latest enhancement to the world's #1 non-BPA beverage can coating. It still doesn't use any bisphenol ingredients, but experienced can makers report that it now sprays like an epoxy. Follow PPG Packaging Coatings on LinkedIn or visit packagingcoatings.com to learn more about why PPG is the coatings partner for can making excellence.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned there. I noted in my research about the all of society approach, whereas this is taking, you guys are taking obviously a North American approach. Does this is that kind of at odds with that statement in terms of this needs to be the whole of society needs to approach decarbonisation, and it needs an integrated effort, or do you think the best way to achieve decarbonisation is basically each individual member state and member organisation kind of taking autonomy of that situation? So it's it just seems an interesting one from our side about how best to approach decarbonisation.
Yeah, that's a really great question, Alex. And first of all, when we say that it's going to take an all of society approach to decarbonize the aluminum industry, that's true whether you're focusing on a regional strategy or a global strategy. And the reason is the vast majority of our carbon reductions are going to happen outside of our facilities. So we certainly are responsible for the energy we use and the energy that we source, but we are not actually making that energy. We're not producing that energy, whether it's electricity or natural gas. And 2/3 of the reductions in carbon intensity for aluminum are going to happen in the energy sector. Now, we can't just throw up our hands and say that's not our problem, can we? Because it is, because we're using that power. We are responsible for the power that we use. However, we won't make those reductions. We will have to partner with our suppliers. We will have to steer our dollars in the right direction in energy supply. We will have to communicate with and partner with the policymakers who are reaching into the energy sector to decarbonize it and help them and let them know what we need as an industry, and manage the issues. So that is all of society as well. That's not country against country or region against region. That's simply not our facilities, but still something we have to speak to. And then when it comes to regionality, first and foremost, this regional approach tells us where to steer our efforts, not that these efforts are more important or less important than efforts in other regions. We simply can't do the same thing in the United States or in Canada that we need to do in other regions, like the Gulf states, or Russia, or China, or Europe, about what they need. They have to steer their own efforts in the most efficient way possible to make sure that the decarbonization effort is effective.
No, that's a very fair point. That certainly kind of answers that question. It's so no, I appreciate that. One other point that I was quite interested in was sort of net zero by 2050. Do you think that's potentially overly ambitious, or we as an industry setting ourselves up for failure, or is it always worth setting ambitious targets? Because if you don't set ambitious targets, then you're never going to achieve those. So I just thought, is it how challenging do you think this will be for the industry as a whole, and particularly with you're looking at election in the US later this year, and I can imagine that's going to bring some potential challenges if there is a change in administration, if there is other factors at play. So there's a couple of loaded questions there, but yeah, the other question also will be, are you kind of at the behest of other factors that aren't under your control as well?
Wow, you stacked them up there, Alex. Well, so let me start at the beginning of your question. So first of all, in terms of achievability and ambition, the first thing that I would say for our industry is that it's not our role to decide whether or not the net zero by 2050 goal is achievable society-wide. Our goal with this report is to take part in that conversation, to give our very best good faith effort as a good steward of the industry to say, this is the curve you have set for our industry, which is a 97% reduction by 2050 over where we are today. Now, I would say certainly that is ambitious. Anybody with eyes and who can count can say that that's ambitious. And our task is to fit our industry to that curve. And this is I will stress that our decarbonization roadmap is not a goal-setting document. It is a roadmap. It is a treasure trail. It is the industry's best thinking today about where the carbon intensity is, and what our best thinking is around what technologies and interventions can reduce them. And so it's a conversation. And that conversation is certainly going to change over the course of the next 30 years, but we have to have it. Our policymakers and customers are expecting us to have this conversation about where we will be in 2050 and how we will get from here to there. And we are more than willing to have that conversation. Now, your second question was about the changing political winds in the United States. Certainly, we're in an election year. We believe this conversation will go forward no matter who's in the White House. The specific way we have the conversation in Washington may change, but our customers aren't going to suddenly abandon this project at the end of November of this year, no matter who's in the White House. This is a project that is society-wide and will continue no matter what. So I would say regarding politics, you have to be sensitive in politics and speak in the language that your current policymakers can understand and can engage in, but you have to have the conversation. And forgive me, Alex, there was three prongs to your question and I forgot the third.
No, and then and then the third was moving things on. Is it a case of watching to see what the developments within the political sphere and the changing landscape will be, or is it a case of just kind of plow forward? And you've pretty much answered that question within your second question there. So no, that totally makes sense. So from my perspective, yeah, just moving the conversation on somewhat. I mean, is there any in terms of policymakers and lobbying efforts? Is there anything that you can do now to kind of push the conversation on? And is there, if you can just explain the roadmap within the press release about how best that the industry can target this?
Absolutely. We have made certain policy recommendations. And I want to stress too that, go forward is not just recommending to government things that they can do. Our industry is investing in decarbonization today. So just last week, we saw another $80 million investment in remelt capacity by hydro in the U.S. market. And the last year has been littered with further and further investments in remelt so that we can bring back more metal and satisfy our customers' voracious appetite for recycled content in the products that they're sourcing from us. Those investments are happening within the industry. That's not the only ones. There's technology advancements across the board that we are seeing companies invest in, from hydrogen as an additive fuel source to electric arc furnace utilization, we're seeing facility level energy portfolio diversification and other moves by industry first adopters to invest in green manufacturing. But then outside of that, yes, we have made a series of policy recommendations. Those policy recommendations are literally across the board. Now, we have been very consistent as an industry in North America that the industry must have reasonably priced and reliably priced electricity and energy in order to be competitive in North America. The U.S. has a competitive advantage globally when it comes to our energy portfolio, and we are encouraging the U.S. government to maintain that advantage and to invest in it for the future and to green our energy sources, because that's where the gains can be made for our industry. More generally, though, the U.S. government has made positive steps and finally, after decades, articulating a reasonably coherent industrial policy platform, and the investment in the industry through the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Bill are bringing government support for decarbonizing our industry and our energy sources, and we support those efforts to the nth degree. One area where we are not seeing the policies that we would like to see and where we are investing as an industry is in recycling policy. It should go without saying that aluminum has always been at the forefront of industrial recycling. In 2 of our 3 major markets, we're doing very well. We're around 90% in automotive and building and construction. But in the consumer segment, specifically for the aluminum beverage can, the United States is very far behind in terms of where we need to be. We're only bringing about half of those cans back, and we've got to do a lot better. So we are working at the state level where there are immediate gains to be made, to change those policies and to implement recycling refunds so that more of those cans come back and come back at a high quality. And we are also working at the federal level on more coherent and integrated federal recycling policy. And then finally, trade. I think I hinted at this, but one of the contributions a regional report can make to the global carbon conversation is in the area of competitiveness and fair trade. And so what we're seeing in the world is that the largest levels of state subsidization of aluminum production are going into areas that are also the highest carbon. And this is, of course, happening in China, that is today making over 70% of the world's aluminum, and they're making some of the highest carbon aluminum in the world, and over 80% of state subsidies in a calendar year that the globe provided to aluminum producers went to 3 firms in China from the Chinese government. And so we find that to be unacceptable. And so trade matters and regionality matters. And so it's not going to matter what moves an industry makes if unfair global trade practices preclude them from staying in the market as they decarbonize. And so it behooves the areas of the world that are ahead of the curve and who have made investments in decarbonization to continue to carry out trade policies that will allow those producers to continue to decarbonize.
Just taking that one step back, you mentioned about the essentially the can industry needs to do better, and that specifically for our audience is interesting there. So, is there any steps that the metal packaging industry can do to basically improve things to aid your quest for net zero by 2050? I mean, is it a case of interacting with consumers more? Is it a case of is this at policy level? Or is it more complex than that? I'm just interested about how the industry can do better.
That is an awesome question, Alex. First of all, it's all of those things. And so when we're asking what we must do is steer consumer sentiment and then consumer behavior. Yeah. And that is no small thing. You know, history has shown us that when the value of aluminum as a reclaimable material is dispersed into consumer hands at a very fine level, which is exactly what an aluminum can is, that the value of the metal won't drive behavior on its own, at least not in some global economies. And so the value, and you know, in the US, I'll be the first to say that American consumers and American policymakers love market-driven policy solutions, but the market alone won't do it. And so we need other interventions, and I've seen some of that. So for instance, in communicating to consumers, labeling matters. Labeling the aluminum can to clearly communicate the value of the material that the consumer is holding and the level of recycled content that is in the can. That's important stuff. It's very powerful messaging, and we've already seen it work. The consumer backlash against single-use plastic is a real thing in North America. It's not necessarily driven by the carbon story. It's driven by material diversion. It's driven by people caring deeply about what's ending up in the ocean and about what materials they're drinking out of that just don't get recycled. And so those messages need to be reinforced, they need to be strengthened, and they need to be amplified. Then at the policy level, we can steer action with policy. We've seen that work in multiple places. There are economies in the world in which consumer behavior is driven by the value of the can. We can look at Brazil's recycling numbers, and we know that individuals are bringing the material back in those economies. But there are other parts of the world, and Europe is a prime example, where policy has been used to reach that end. Consumers obviously care deeply about recycling in Europe, but policy also has steered that behavior. And so that's what we're looking for in the United States. In the United States, the best example of policy that works for us is recycling refunds, deposit legislation. We know that the 12 states that have it are where the best aluminum can recycling happens. And so we're trying to replicate that in further states. We have active initiatives right now in several target states, and we hope to expand that club of recycling refund states in the very near future. Ultimately, though, we need a federal solution, and that's what we're working for there.
And then my last point is just in terms of the brand owner level, do you think more needs to be done from brand owners to be fully on board with net zero targets? I know certainly in the last few years there's been lots of efforts from various companies to increase sustainability efforts, but maybe the cynical point of view is that from a marketing perspective it looks good, but do you think that the brand owners are fully on board with some of these net zero targets? And if not, is there more that the industry can do to get some of the key global players to be fully on board with net zero targets?
I think the message has been received by brand owners from their customers that decarbonizing is a real thing, and you're going to have to do more than just speak to it. I think that message has absolutely been received. It's been received by our producers and our members. And so the value chain has heard that. Now, I would also say, though, that this is a process and not a race. We didn't just win it and we're done. I think that it's a great thing that customers continue to deliver that message. And so keeping the pressure on and keeping us all moving forward in a single direction is something that will have to be restated and re-verified over time. Now, with that said, I think that the brand owners, consumers, bottlers, and others are all moving forward in lockstep right now on where we need to go in the future. And that's a great thing. So It's a great story that our industry has to tell, but telling the story is one side of the conversation, and actually doing it and writing the story is the other side of the equation. We're currently writing it, and we will only know it has a happy ending when we get to the end of it.
Absolutely, and that's my concluding points as well. Is that this sounds great in theory, and ultimately it's a case of putting these motions into action. So, is there any kind of closing comments from your side about how the industry, particularly the aluminium industry, and also for our industry, the metal packaging industry, can really galvanize and get behind these efforts? Because ultimately these are important issues for not just our future but our children's future as well.
I could say we have a daunting task ahead of us as an industry and as an economy and as a region and as a globe. It's a daunting task, and we can't be still and we can't be silent. The aluminum producers and their aluminum associations are doing our part. We're taking part in this conversation. We're getting the message out. We're doing the numbers crunching to know where and how to move forward. And now we all have to do it. It's not a foregone conclusion that we will get there or get there in time.
No, that's I think that's a very compelling statement to end the conversation. So no, Charles, it's been a pleasure, and look forward to catching up with you soon to see how developments have gone. So no, appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Alex, and feel free to reach out in the future.
Thank you.